Good evening, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called Macduff Lives. And tonight I'm doing my Wednesday night 1 hour book reviews. And tonight it's The Phoenix Program by Doug Valentine. I'll just hold it up so you can see the cover here. Sorry, that's out of focus. There you go. And you can see the phoenix on the front of it. And we spent a lot of time analyzing the idea of the phoenix, rising from the ashes, and what does that symbol mean? Hello, everybody. Hi, Norman, John, Callie, Corky, Kathy, and everyone else. Nice to see you here on a Wednesday night for Macduff's Wednesday book review. And the books that we review on Wednesday nights are books on the book train over at screamingospreys.com. So you can visit screamingospreys.com and start keeping up to date with what we're doing by looking at the calendar that's kept by Jumping Mouse, our great volunteer, Catherine, who is also working very hard to back up our shows onto BitChute so that we don't have to rely on YouTube anymore. But we are taking advantage of YouTube until we no longer need it. It's the best way to reach a lot of people at once. It still is, and that's why we use it. If they fire me again, I'll just adapt. And that's what the neighborhood news studio folks have done, including our great Andy DeBala, who is working once again to produce the show tonight and engineering. There he is displaying for us. Thanks, Andy. The calendar, and featured right in the middle is the cover of our book for tonight, The Phoenix Program. Well, I just can't say enough about this book. Next to The Secret Team, I'd say it's the most important book to show exactly what was going on in the Pentagon during my dad's days at SACSA. Of course, I'd have to add The Crimes of Patriots by Jonathan Whitney, which is a book I reviewed in my 1 hour series earlier. So you can find that on the playlist that Jumping Mouse keeps for us at screamingospreys.com. That book shows, Crimes of Patriots shows the underhanded financing that was going on for the CIA by using profits from the heroin trade, from the opium trade, to finance its dirty wars. And that tragedy was the backstory behind the Vietnam War, in that it was more important to the CIA to make money than it was to protect the health and lives of Americans, especially Black and Latino Americans, whom they could use to sell dope to in American cities through their Hallowell plan, the Paul Hallowell plan. And between George Webb and myself, we've covered that pretty thoroughly. The CIA just decided, well, we're going to finance our operations by selling dope to Americans, and they got away with it, up to now. Just like Albert Pike and his statue got away with it up to now. Finally, it got pulled down. And my show, the Minefields number 104, seems to have hit a nerve with people. Everybody's been sharing that one, and I think with good reason. We need to recognize the evil side of Freemasonry as expressed in Albert Pike's works and his cronies reviving the KKK under Woodrow Wilson. Well, that whole story is part of the backstory for the Phoenix Program. Doug Valentine is one of the nicest, sweetest people you could ever hope to meet. I'm so glad to call him a friend. And though he and I disagreed over the recent election, I think we have a tremendous sympathy for each other's stories. And so much because of his amazing ability to put things together. And we now know that my dad, who we call McDuff, ran a secret operation to try to catch the CIA in a major drug deal with one of the Laotian drug dealers back in 1967 while he was working at Saxa. So the Phoenix program essentially is a net, a totalitarian net that descended upon Vietnam courtesy of the CIA and their assistance in the U.S. military. Oh, there's a picture of Doug. That puts him very well. He's an incredibly sharp mind, and putting the things together that he's done is a great service to humanity. I can't say enough for Doug Valentine's work. So the Phoenix program, rising from the ashes, indeed, well, what they did was they created the chaos, and then they decided that we're going to rebuild Vietnam in the image of this totalitarian state with everybody under surveillance, and anyone who is not with the state, with the program, becomes eliminated. So let's start by reading the first part of the book, actually the introduction, in which I think we get a lot of insight into the horror imposed not only on the Vietnamese, but also upon the young American service people who didn't know they were going to be getting into a program involving stealthy murder and other just horrible crimes against humanity. But that's what we have to face if we want to find our way out of this crazy trap our American republic has fallen into from these people. These disgusting people. Well, let's read the story about a man who had that experience. His name is Elton Manzione. It was well after midnight. Elton Manzione, his wife Lynn, and I sat at their kitchen table, drinking steaming cups of coffee. Rock and roll music throbbed from the living room. A lean, dark man with lean Mediterranean features, Elton was chain-smoking Pall Malls and telling me about his experiences as a 20-year-old U.S. Navy SEAL in Vietnam in 1964. It was hot and humid and that sultry Georgia night, and we were exhausted, but I pressed him for more specific information. What was your most memorable experience? Elton looked down, and with considerable effort, he said quietly, "There's one experience I remember very well. It was my last assignment. I remember my last assignment very well." They, Elton began, referring to the Navy commander and Special Forces colonel who issued orders to the SEAL team. So we're talking about a Navy SEAL team here. Called the three of us, Elton, Eddie, and John, into the briefing room and sat us down. They said they were having a problem at a tiny village about a quarter of a mile from North Vietnam in the DMZ, the Demilitarized Zone, which is George would call the Green Zone, okay? They said some choppers and recon planes were taking fire from up there. They never really explained why. For example, they didn't just bomb it, which was their usual response, but I got the idea that the village chief was politically connected and that the thing had to be done quietly. We worked in what were called hunter-killer teams, Elton explained. The hunter team was a four-man unit, usually all Americans, sometimes one or two Vietnamese or Chinese mercenaries called counter-terrorists, CTs for short. Most CTs were enemy soldiers who had deserted or South Vietnamese criminals. Our job was to find the enemy and nail him in place, spot his position, then go back to a prearranged place and call in the killer team. The killer team was usually 12 to 25 South Vietnamese Special Forces led by Green Berets. Then we join up with the killer team and take out the enemy. But on this particular mission, Elton explained, the SEALs went in alone. Quote, they said there was this 51 caliber anti-aircraft gun somewhere near the village that was taking pot shots at us, and that there was a specific person in the village operating the gun. They give us a picture of the guy and a map of the village. It's a small village, maybe 12 or 15 hooches. This is the hooch, they say. The guy sleeps on the mat on the left side. He has 2 daughters. They don't know if he has a mama son or where she is, but they say, you guys are going to go in and get this guy. You, meaning me, are going to snuff him. Sweats is going to find out where the gun is and blow it. Laboon is going to hang back at the village gate covering us. He's the stoner. He's got the machine gun. And I'm going to go in the hooch and snuff this guy. What you need to do first, they say, is sit along the trail leading from the village to the gun for a day or 2 and watch where this guy goes. And that will help us uncover the gun, which it did. We watched him go right to where the gun was. We were 30 yards away, and we watched for a while. While we were watching, when we weren't watching, we'd take a break and go another 600 yards down the trail to relax. And we did that for maybe 2 days, watching him coming and going, and got an idea of his routine. When he went to bed, when he got up, where he went. Did he go back behind the hooch to piss? Did he go into the jungle? That sort of thing. They told us, do that, then come back and tell us what you found out. So we went back and said, we know where the gun is, and we showed them where it was on the map. We were back in camp for about 6 hours, and they said, okay, you're going out at 0400 tomorrow. And it's like we say, you, meaning me, are going to snuff this guy. Sweats is going to take out the gun, and Laboon's going to cover the gate. Elton explained that on special missions like this, the usual procedure was to snatch the targeted VC cadre and bring him back to Dong Ha for interrogation. In that case, Elton would have slipped into the hooch and rendered the cadre unconscious, while Sweats demolished the anti-aircraft gun, and Laboon signaled the killer team to descend upon the village in its black CIA-supplied helicopters. The SEALs and their prisoner would then climb on board and be extracted. In this case, however, the cadre was targeted for assassination. We left out of Cam Lo, Elton continued. We were taken by boat partway up the river and walked in by foot, maybe 2.5, 3 miles. At 4 in the morning, we start moving across an area that was maybe 100 yards wide. It's a clearing running up to the village. We're wearing black pajamas, and we've got black paint on our faces. We're doing this very carefully, moving on the ground 1/4 of an inch at a time. Move, stop, listen, move, stop, listen. To check for tripwires, you take a blade of grass and put it between your teeth. Move your head up and down, from side to side, watching the end of the blade of grass. If it bends, you know you've hit something, but of course the grass never sets off the tripwire, so it's safe. It takes us 1.5 hours to cross the relatively short stretch of open grass because we're moving so slowly. And we're being so quiet we can hardly hear each other, let alone anybody else hearing us. I mean, I know they're out there. Laboon's 5 yards that way, Sweats is 5 yards to my right, but I can't hear them. And so we crawl up to the gate. There's no booby traps. I go in. Sweats has a satchel charge for the 51 caliber gun and has split off to where it is, maybe 60 yards away. Laboon is sitting at the gate. The village is very quiet. There are some dogs. They're sleeping. They stir, but they don't even growl. I go into the hooch and I spot my person. Well, somebody stirs in the next bed. I'm carrying my commando knife, and one of the things we learned is how to kill somebody instantly with it. So I put my hand over her mouth and come up under the second rib, go through the heart, give it a flick. It snaps the spinal cord. Not thinking, because I think, hey, Then I hear the explosion go off, and I know the gun is out. Somebody else in the corner starts to stir, so I pull out the sidearm and put it against her head and shoot her. She's dead. Of course, by this time, the whole village is awake. I go out, waiting for sweats to come because the gun's been blown. People are kind of wandering around, and I'm pretty dazed. And I look back into the hooch, and there were two young girls. I'd killed the wrong people. Elton Manzione and his comrades returned to their base at Cam Low, strung out from dexedrine and remorse. Elton went into the ammo dump and sat on top of a stack of ammunition crates with a grenade, its pin pulled, between his legs and an M16 cradled in his arms. He sat there, refusing to budge until he was given a ticket home. In early 1984, Elton Manzione was the first person to answer a query I had placed in the Vietnam Veterans newsletter asking for interviews with people who had served in the Phoenix program. Elton wrote to me saying, quote, "While I was not a participant in Phoenix, I was closely involved in what I think was the forerunner. It was part of what was known as O-Plan 34. This was the old Leaping Lena infiltration program for LRRP, or Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol, operations into Laos. During the time I was involved, it became the well-known Delta program. While all this happened before Phoenix, the operations were essentially the same. Our primary function was intelligence gathering, but we also carried out the undermining of the infrastructure types of things, such as kidnapping, assassination, sabotage, etc. The story needs to be told, Elton said, because the whole aura of the Vietnam War was influenced by what went on in the hunter-killer teams of Phoenix, Delta, etc. That was the point at which many of us realized we were no longer the good guys in the white hats defending freedom, that we were assassins, pure and simple. That disillusionment carried over to all other aspects of the war and was eventually responsible for it becoming America's most unpopular war. Pardon me. The story of Phoenix is not easily told. Many of the participants, having signed non-disclosure agreements, are legally prohibited from telling what they know. Others are silenced by their own consciences. Still others are professional soldiers whose careers would suffer if they were to reveal the secrets of their employers. Falsification of records makes the story even harder to prove. For example, there is no record of Elton Manzione's ever having been in Vietnam. Yet, for reasons which are explained in my first book, The Hotel Tacloban, I was predisposed to believe Manzione. I had confirmed that my father's military records were deliberately altered to show that he had not been in prison for 2 years in a Japanese POW camp. The effects of the cover-up were devastating and ultimately caused my father to have a heart attack at the age of 45. Thus, long before I met Elton Manzione, I knew that the government was capable of concealing its misdeeds under a cloak of secrecy, threats, and fraud, and I knew how terrible the consequences could be. Then I began to wonder if cover-ups like the one my father had also occurred in the Vietnam War, and that led me to, in the fall of 1983, to visit David Houle, Director of Veterans Services in New Hampshire. I asked him if there was a part of the Vietnam War that had been concealed, and without hesitation he replied, Phoenix. After explaining a little about it, he mentioned that one of his clients had been in the program, and then that his client's service records, like those of Elton Manzione and my father's, had been altered. They showed that he had been a cook in Vietnam. I asked to meet House's client, but the fellow refused. Formerly with Special Forces in Vietnam, he was disabled and afraid the VA would cut off his benefits if he talked to me. That fear of the government, so incongruous on the part of a war veteran, made me more determined than ever to uncover the truth about Phoenix, a goal which has taken 4 years to accomplish. That's a long time to spend researching and writing a book, but I believe it was worthwhile, for Phoenix symbolizes an aspect of the Vietnam War that changed forever the way Americans think about themselves and their government. Developed in 1967 by the CIA, Phoenix combined existing counterinsurgency programs into a concerted effort to, quote, neutralize the Viet Cong infrastructure, the VCI. The euphemism neutralize means to kill, capture, or make to defect. The word infrastructure refers to those civilians suspected of supporting North Vietnamese and Viet Cong soldiers, like the one targeted in Elton Manzione's final operation. Central to Phoenix is the fact that it targeted civilians, not soldiers. As a result, its detractors charged that Phoenix violated the part of the Geneva Convention guaranteeing protection to civilians in times of war. By analogy, said Ogden Reed, a member of the Congressional Committee investigating Phoenix in 1971, quote, if the Union had had a Phoenix program during the Civil War, its targets would have been civilians like Jefferson Davis or the mayor of Macon, Georgia. Under Phoenix, or Phuong Nguyen, as it was called by Vietnamese, due process was totally non-existent. South Vietnamese citizens whose names appeared on blacklists could be kidnapped, tortured, detained for 2 years without trial, or even murdered, simply on the word of an anonymous informer. At its height, Phoenix managers imposed quotas of 1,800 neutralizations per month on the people running the program in the field, opening up the program to abuses by corrupt security officers, policemen, politicians, and racketeers, all of whom extorted innocent civilians, as well as VCI. Legendary CIA officer Lucien Conin described Phoenix as, quote, a very good blackmail scheme for the central government. If you don't do what I want, you're VC. Because Phoenix neutralizations were often conducted at midnight, while its victims were at home and sleeping in bed, Phoenix proponents described the program as a, quote, scalpel designed to replace the bludgeon of search and destroy operations, airstrikes, and artillery barrages that indiscriminately wiped out entire villages and did little to win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese population. Yet, as Elton Manzione's story illustrates, the scalpel cut deeper than the U.S. government admits. Indeed, Phoenix was, among other things, an instrument of counter-terror, the psychological warfare tactic in which VCI members were brutally murdered along with their families or neighbors as a means of terrorizing the neighborhood population into a state of submission. Such horrendous acts were, for propaganda purposes, often made to look as if they had been committed by the enemy. This book questions how Americans, who consider themselves a nation ruled by laws and an ethic of fair play, could create a program like Phoenix. By scrutinizing the program and the people who participated in it, and by employing the program as a symbol of the dark side of the human psyche, the author hopes to articulate the subtle ways in which the Vietnam War changed how Americans think about themselves. This book is about terror and its role in political warfare. It will show how, as successive American governments sink deeper and deeper into the vortex of covert operations, ostensibly to combat terrorism and communist insurgencies, the American people gradually lose touch with the democratic ideals that once defined their national self-concept. This book asks, what happens when Phoenix comes home to roost? And just a personal note from my work with George Webb, as we met numerous times up at National Harbor, where at the entrance, as you're driving down the entrance way, you pass a large statue, which at first it looks just like some different colored metal, blue, yellow, red, orange, in a kind of a radical modern art type of sculpture that's maybe 30, 40 feet tall. But once you see this image of the Phoenix from the Phoenix program on this book here, then you realize that what that is a picture of the Phoenix. And this is a symbol of exactly what Doug predicted in his book way back. When was this published? It was published in 1990. So 30 years later, there it is, the Phoenix, sitting at National Harbor saying, "Hello, we've come home to roost." Well, we read probably 25 or 30 different readings of this book on the show before it was taken down by YouTube. And I can't reproduce all of that work here, but I want to just emphasize one part of the book which touches upon my dad's career, and that, of course, is where it refers to the SACSA program. So let me move forward to there and pick up reading. Pardon me a second. The PRU is an abbreviation for Provincial Reconnaissance Units. These are defined by Doug in his glossary as mercenary forces under the control of the CIA in South Vietnam. So these are mercenaries, meaning they're people that have, nothing in their lives except for their ability to do military things and quasi-military things. In other words, criminals or people who got captured and had no other choice but to go into this business of mercenaries for the CIA. So in talking about the PRU, we'll pick up from Doug Valentine's book here on page 296. And the point of this little reading is because of how important it is to me to find out what SACSA had to do with the Phoenix program. Because I know my father worked at SACSA, but I hope that he was not personally involved in the Phoenix program. So you listen along with me as I read Doug's account here and see what you think. Veteran CIA paramilitary officer Rudy Enders disagreed when we met and insisted that the PRU operated effectively, at least until the ceasefire, when they were put under control of the special branch. In any case, in March 1969 decree putting the PRU under the National Police facilitated plausible denial. In other words, the CIA has been responsible for these people, but technically now they've been transferred to the South Vietnamese government, and the government of Vietnam becomes ostensibly in charge. In any case, it enabled William Colby to swear on a stack of Bibles that the CIA was not operationally involved. The government of Vietnam became accountable as the CIA maneuvered to scapegoat its oblivious client. But the government of Vietnam could not afford, even with CIA-sanctioned corruption and drug trafficking, to support the PRU on its own, nor was the CIA willing to abandon the rifle-shot approach at the moment it said it had the VCI on the ropes. But resources channeled through the Phoenix program could not compensate for the reduction in CIA support and supervision, so the PRU turned to shakedowns of lucrative targets in the private sector to keep their organization intact. In other words, these mercenaries now become blackmailing criminals. Phoenix and the PRU became captive to criminal enterprises and the subject of increasing controversy. Always inextricably linked, the Phoenix and PRU programs were simultaneously brought under military review in 1969. On October 20th, 1969, in a secret memo to Defense Secretary Melvin Laird, Army Secretary Stanley Resor referred to, quote, the social and moral costs and the desirability of a selective attack, and expressed concern over these programs. Later that day, Laird conveyed his concern over, quote, lack of progress in the Phoenix program to General Earl Weaver, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. 1 month later, Laird, referring to the My Lai massacre and the Green Beret murder case, informed Wheeler of his growing anxiety over the PRU program in view of recent events concerning U.S. military conduct in South Vietnam, unquote. In response to Defense Secretary Laird's concerns about the Phoenix program, MACV commander, that's MACV, that's Military Assistance Command Vietnam, Commander Abrams assured Washington that statistically the program has made significant progress in recent months. Abrams recounted the reforms cited on the preceding pages, but then offered a candid and somewhat ominous appraisal, saying, "It is clear to me and the commanders in the field that the program does not yet have the degree of sophistication and depth necessary to combat the highly developed and long experienced VC infrastructure in South Vietnam." Abrams noted that Ambassador Bunker had agreed to talk to President Chu about Phoenix, especially with respect to improving GVN local official attitudes. Abrams closed by promising a separate report on the PRU. At this point, the Pentagon had three elements interested in Phoenix. The Joint Chiefs were involved through SACSA. The Defense Department was involved through its Office of International Security Assistance, ISA, and MACV was involved through CORDS. For its part, SACSA was not in any chain of command, but served the Joint Chiefs by bringing together representatives from the State Department, CIA, U.S. Information Agency, Agency for International Development, and the Department of Defense. Broad policies came down to SACSA from the White House through the National Security Council, while specific ideas regarding Psy-War and counterinsurgency came up from MACV or the individual services. SACSA assigned off staff members to present recommendations for consideration by the Joint Chiefs. When the chiefs reached a decision on how a policy was to be implemented, the service responsible for implementing that policy was directed to provide the manpower, materiel, and money. The Army Intelligence Corps had responsibility over Phoenix. SACSA itself was divided into three parts: for special operations in South Vietnam, for special operations elsewhere, and for revolutionary development programs in Vietnam, including Phoenix. MACV reported data on Phoenix to SACSA only when solicited. SACSA's revolutionary development component did studies and drafted papers on Phoenix for the Joint Chiefs' signature. From the inception of Phoenix until January 1969, Major General William Dupuy served as SACSA. A former CIA Deputy Division Chief, Dupuy met regularly with State Department Officer Phil Habib and CIA Far East Division Chief William Colby to coordinate unconventional warfare policy in South Vietnam. Dupuy was replaced by Major General John Freund, commander of the 199th Infantry Brigade when it supported Contact 4. Freund had little clout with the Joint Chiefs and was fired after 6 months. Replacing him was the former SOG commander, Brigadier General Donald Blackburn, under whose management SACSA had little involvement in Phoenix. The Defense Department's Office of International Security Affairs, ISA, was by comparison more deeply involved with setting Phoenix policy. According to its charter, ISA provides supervision in areas of security assistance, military assistance advisory groups and missions, and the negotiating and monitoring of agreements with foreign governments. Insofar as Phoenix was a security assistance program funded by the military through cords, which ISA authorized in May of 1967, ISA had overall supervision of the program. Called the Pentagon's State Department by Robert Comer, ISA coordinated State and Defense Department policies on Vietnam. ISA representatives sat on the State Department's Ad Hoc PSYOPs Committee, and ISA representatives, along with CIA officers Jack Horgan and Tom Donahue, sat on the State Department's Vietnamization Task Force, which, through the National Security Council, determined how to turn the war, including Phoenix, over to the Vietnamese. Within ISA, policy regarding Vietnamization was coordinated by the Vietnam Task Force. Created in mid-1969, the VNTF was headed by Major General George Blanchard and, until October 1970, by General Fred Carhose. Each VNTF chief in turn reported to ISA Chief Warren Nutter's deputy for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, Dennis Doolin, and Doolin's assistant, Tom Constant. It was at the VNTF that Phoenix policies were coordinated between Saigon and the concerned parties in Washington. So it came to pass that in November 1969, the VNTF was saddled with the task of bringing into line with, quote, USAID budgets and the law, as one VNTF coordinator put it, a program that had been conceived by the CIA without any regard for legalities, and to do it without treading on the CIA's ability to conduct covert operations. It was a ticklish job that required squaring the hard reality of political warfare in Vietnam with the fluctuating political situation in Washington. The major effects were to bring the military into an adulterous relationship with the special branch and to set the State Department on a collision course with international law. The Vietnam Task Force's assistant for concepts and strategies became the staff officer responsible for Phoenix. A Marine lieutenant colonel standing over 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds, he was a tough Korean War veteran with a resume that included employment with the CIA and the State Department, as well as with the military. From 1964 to 67, he prepared military officers for civil operations service in Vietnam, and from late 67 to 69, he was a member of CORDS, serving as John Paul Van's deputy for plans and programs in 3 Corps. Jack, as he has been dubbed, preferred to remain anonymous when we met at his home in 1987. Jack was at the center of the Phoenix drama as it was acted out in Saigon and Washington, and according to him, the VNTF was Laird's baby. It was his locus. Jack often briefed the defense secretary and prepared hundreds of memos for his signature. He wrote papers for and briefed the ISA director, Warren Nutter. He coordinated on a daily basis with members of the NSC, the Vietnam Working Group, the Special Studies Group, the Vietnamization Task Group, over which the VNTF had cognizance, and Tom Donahue at SAVA. On matters affecting the Joint Chiefs, Jack coordinated with its representative, Colonel Paul Kelly, later Commandant of the Marine Corps. Jack's contact at SACSA was Colonel Ray Singer, and he worked with members of Congress investigating various facets of the Vietnam War. After all, Jack was the man in the middle. He's an experienced military theorist, and his recollections and assessments of the Phoenix program are especially incisive and worth noting. Jack adhered to the theory that in order to command, a counterinsurgency requires a coordinated military police intelligence attack against the insurgents' political leadership. But Jack contended, although this theory is valid, Thompson's extrapolation from Malaya to Vietnam was doomed to fail. For where the ethnic Chinese leading the insurgency in Malaya were visibly different from the Malayan people, those in the VCI were indistinguishable from other Vietnamese and impossible to track by foreign advisors. What's more, said Jack, the Brits were shrewd enough to offer large rewards to informers, but no Vietnamese was going to turn in Uncle Ho for $50. Well, as we're reaching the end of our hour review, I want to make some summary comments here about the importance of this program. Let's just let this one sentence a minute ago resonate for a second. Jack adhered to Robert Thompson's theory that in order to succeed, a counterinsurgency requires a coordinated military police intelligence attack against the insurgents' political leadership. Now, take those words and let them kind of wash over the events of the past month. A coordinated military political attack against the insurgents' political leadership. Now, if you are one of those people that considers Trump an insurgent, then doesn't this all fit together pretty nicely? Where now you have the military and the police working together in a dragnet, going out to pick up people who were identified as having gone into the Capitol grounds, perhaps even onto the lawn, anybody that went past the bicycle barricades, even though the barricades obviously were removed in many instances by the police themselves. So this is an attack upon Trump as an insurgent. And this is counterinsurgency happening right here in the nation's capital against the American people. The Phoenix program has come home to roost. This is what we are talking about here at McDuff Channel. This is why my father's life is important, because he was one of those guys that did not believe in the CIA's philosophy. He was one of those guys that, if you're going to fight a war, fight an honorable war and get it over with quickly so everybody can go home and rebuild the towns and cities and families and farms and not be stuck in some nightmare totalitarian dragnet against fellow citizens, people who've done nothing to you, nothing to hurt America. The only reason that they're going after them, both in Vietnam and here, is because they are politically opposed to the regime. Now, getting back to my question about my father, the Raid by Benjamin Shimmer gives enough details to me to show that my father was involved in the planning of the raid on Sante. Now we also know that my father was involved in the TDY sting, the attempt to catch people like Richard Armitage, okay, going out into Laos and buying dope from a Vang Pao for the purpose of selling to American kids so they could buy more guns and take down more countries. That's what is important about the Phoenix program, because as Ted Shackling once said, why shouldn't they just do it here? The American people aren't paying any attention. But no, my father wasn't a person involved in this nastiness. At least he probably knew about some of it and most of it, and maybe he was planning operations under it. But it was actually administered under this ISA program, the Internal Security Affairs of the Department of Defense, under Melvin Laird. Now, Melvin Laird appears to have been a good guy comparatively to the creeps in the CIA. And it was under Laird that my dad was allowed to pursue the Sante raid. It was Laird who signed my dad's Meritorious Civilian Service Award. And it was Laird who expressed concerns about the Phoenix program, as we read just a few minutes ago. So I put Melvin Laird in the good guy category. On the other hand, Major William Dupuy, who served at SACSA from 67 to 69, this is the crucial period. Major General William Dupuy was a former CIA Deputy Division Chief. Now, I didn't know that. Did anybody know that? A question, did my dad even know that? He probably did. But here's a book about General Dupuy, which I have not read cover to cover, but I've pulled out some of them. You know how we do. We go to the index and we look for the stuff that's important. And we find that General Dupuy was detailed to the CIA in the 50s under all right, CIA Detail, Chapter 6. He was made responsible for a politically sensitive covert paramilitary operation in China. He was called by Colonel Richard Stilwell to become responsible for clandestine CIA operations in the Far East, and was in a position to hire Dupuy for the China job. Stillwell was present at the creation, to borrow Dean Acheson's book title, concerning the early days of the Cold War. Well, we're out of time, but I wanted to mention General Dupuy as having been a CIA guy operating under military cover, as often happened. And I don't think my dad would know whether somebody was operating as a CIA officer or as a military officer until he saw the things that they do. What actually do these people do? And it was under, or perhaps just before Dupuy comes in, that my dad launched the operation in TDY in 1967, when there was a gap between the previous one, which was Piers. And Piers was a veteran of the Burma Hump, where they were flying opium across from India to China to get the opium there to pay the soldiers for Chiang Kai-shek. All this stuff is insanity. It's hard to believe, but this is where our country is right now. The result of all these things has brought us to this day. Well, thanks everybody for being with me. I urge everyone to get a copy of the Phoenix program and treat it as a a valuable gift, almost a spiritual guide to what's going on in this country today. The idea of the Phoenix program, a totalitarian net cast on the people of Vietnam to basically analyze them, categorize them, and when necessary, or even when convenient, just eliminate them. Will they do it here in the United States? That's the question we're facing right now, today, in 2021. Thanks very much, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow.